Hi, my name is Alex. I'll be talking about how social Darwinism is discriminatory. So first we have to ask, what is social Darwinism? Social Darwinism is the application of Charles Darwin's ideas about evolution and survival of the fittest to human society and social networks, particularly as justification for imperialist expansion. Now, philosopher Herbert Spencer used this theory as an explanation for the phenomenon in human society which mirrors that of the animal society, where the strong will usually thrive and prosper, while the weak falter and die. He believed that some races were inherently more fit than others, and that specific races are seen as inferior and others are superior. This idea was first recognized by Darwinists in the 19th century, who were essentially racist and discriminatory, and believed in racial superiority depending on the status of race in society. So, if a race had a dominant status in the society, it was considered the superior race and more likely to survive. Now, when you talk about social Darwinism, it is usually associated with colonialism or imperialism. Now, we all know that imperialism is when a stronger country takes over a weaker one for its natural resources. For example, the French taking over Senegal or the British taking over India. So, Europeans use social Darwinism as an excuse for imperialization. Some Europeans, however, actually believed in social Darwinism, and that they had the responsibility to help and impart their culture on other races, as evidenced by the poem The White Man's Burden by British poet Rudyard Kipling. Still, despite the Europeans' claims that they wanted to help Africans, they forcibly took over African governments and their natural resources. As I mentioned before, the French had colonized Senegal. Besides taking over the natural resources in Senegal, the French had also attempted to assimilate Africans into French culture. They had the belief that because they were stronger than the natives in Senegal, that by default their culture was also superior. In Asia, the British did more or less the same thing with India. They tried converting natives to Christianity, they strictly controlled trade within India, and also controlled the flow of India's natural resources. We can even see some of the effects that the British had on India today. For example, India adopted some of its modern political institutions from the British. Imperialism also, however, established rivalries between races, as Indians were given menial jobs under British rule. Social Darwinism also had a very strong influence on Nazi ideology. For example, the Holocaust was, according to Hitler, making a Germany for Germans. The Holocaust was Nazi Germany's perception to murder and slaughter the Jews along with gypsies, homosexuals, and other people that Hitler didn't consider as German. It was a genocide based on creating a pure Aryan race. Hitler believed that the German race was the major and stronger race, and it was the Aryan race. He believed other minor races such as the Jewish, Slavic, and the Gypsies were the ones who were weak and carried genetic diseases. According to Hitler, it was only natural for inferior races to struggle to survive, and that what he was doing is natural in the world, like a so-called dog-eat-dog world, which directly supports social Darwinism. Despite the fact that Hitler said this himself, many people believe Hitler simply made the Jewish people a scapegoat for Germany's problems. Well, the genocide caused deaths of about 11 million people, which includes almost 6 million of the Jewish race. Another genocide that not many people might know about is the Holodomor. The Holodomor was a man-made famine in Ukraine, believed to be created by the Soviet Union during 1932 and 1933. It was caused by Stalin and was an effect of trying to build up Soviet Russia as a superpower. Nearly 4 million ethnic Ukrainians starved to death. Those that weren't strong enough to survive without food usually died. And even though that Stalin didn't directly attack the Ukrainian population, he exploited Ukrainian farmers by taking their food in order to supplement his own country, which was Russia. As mentioned before, influences of social Darwinism were everywhere. Influences were even here in America as well. Through the eugenics movement in America in the 1920s, it was believed that human genes could be improved by eliminating undesirable traits through breeding, like we do today with animals. Well, why did this belief have anything to do with social Darwinism? Basically, it promoted selective breeding. This becomes a problem when it comes to society because eventually a certain gene or characteristic becomes associated with certain races. Most stereotypes these days are based off of this. Now often this would lead to discrimination between these races and eventually to racism. Some even use the belief of eugenics as argument against educating African Americans. Now what's even crazier was that criminality and alcoholism were acknowledged as inheritable traits under the eugenics movement. Well, surely Americans back then couldn't have been so naive as to believe this, right? Well, you're wrong. In fact, some have argued that the Immigration Act of 1924 may have been influenced by eugenics, so as to keep immigrants out of America. However, to be fair, eugenics was, at the time, backed up by a very prominent biologist, Charles Davenport, which gave the field of eugenics some credibility. Now, things were also getting very discriminatory in social classes, economy-wise. From 1870 to 1900, America was in the era of industrialization. This period is also known as laissez-faire capitalism in America. Laissez-faire capitalism was basically where the government would have no power when it came to private businesses and their interactions. During this period, the idea of survival of the fittest was brought into business by John D. Rockefeller. It established the thought and effect that social process is dependent on the wealthy, and that whoever had money had power. So with their wealth, money, and power, these people dominated the product-producing industries, which strongly controlled the prices of goods in America. They began to reduce wages as well as working conditions for the working class. It was no longer discrimination between races, but discrimination between social classes. Eventually, this all led to changes in legislation on working conditions and wages. In conclusion, the theory of social Darwinism has been used to support many ideas. It has been used to support and justify genocides such as the Holocaust. It is one of the main justifications for European colonization and imperialism. This theory has also impacted American society in many ways. Events such as the eugenics movement were also justified by social Darwinism. So really, the idea of social Darwinism was everywhere. However, it has been proven that many of such justifications are invalid, not legitimate, and very discriminatory. Now, why is that? It's pretty much proven that in many big events like imperialism and the Holocaust, social Darwinism was used as an illegitimate reason to be hostile towards other races. So is it totally wrong? Well, the answer to that is pretty clear. The theory is misrepresented by whoever used it to justify their superiority or discriminatory attitudes. We know today that there is no good or bad when it comes to talking about races. But should people try to assimilate the differences in races and cultures, or simply accept the existing difference? If a social Darwinist is answering the question, his response seems obvious. In modern society, discrimination simply toward one race is becoming less common, but it still does exist. So does that mean an idea similar to social Darwinism still exists now? What are the factors that are responsible for the difference between races that are in the same environment? These interesting questions still remain in the society as the theory of social Darwinism fades away.